Hey everyone, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to be installing our Blitz front bumper that you see here on our 2023 Colorado ZR2. So we're going to have to start off with some disassembly here on the truck. Essentially, we're going to be removing the entire front fascia assembly so that we can get this lower gray or black plastic section off of the bottom. We're going to start by removing the skid plate, so we'll get the truck raised up a bit so we can access that. One thing I will point out here real quick is you'll see that ours no longer has the fog lights in these holes. Don't worry, we'll show you that removal and disassembly here in a little bit. Those were taken out during our R&D process. So with this up a little bit higher, you can get a better look at the skid plate here. If you're going to be installing the Victory 4x4 skid plate along with your bumper, this, as well as the smaller aluminum section that you'll have back in here under your differential, can be removed. However, if you're just installing our front bumper for now, we'll just take this front section off. For that, you need a 13mm socket and a T40 Torx. The Torx will take care of the two forwardmost bolts up here, and then the 13mm will take out the remaining 5 along the back. When removing this factory hardware, just pay attention to the lengths, as the 3 bolts that run along the center of the skid are going to be a little bit longer than the 2 that go in the back under here. When taking out the final bolt, just make sure that you have it supported. Luckily, it is made of aluminum, so it's pretty lightweight. So we'll get this down and out of the way. Now this black steel kind of bash plate, if you will, can be removed. To access the 2 top mounting bolts, you will have to pull these plastic covers with just a panel tool or a screwdriver by getting behind the top edge here and prying out, and then that should kind of lift up, and they do have a small plastic retainer that holds them in place. From there, you'll need your 13 again to reach back in here and remove the 2 top mounting bolts for this. I was able to pull this one out. You may drop these down in there. Not a big deal. Once this is out of the way, if they don't fall out automatically, you should be able to kind of grab those. You can then remove the 2 bottom bolts and pull this down and out of the way. You can see I already got the one on that side, so just make sure it's supported once again and pull your final bolt. From here, you can remove both tow hooks with an 18mm socket and wrench. From there, you can come around to your wheel openings. We got the tire out of the way to make some extra room in here. You don't necessarily have to do that to access these, but there should be 6 of these Torx head fasteners throughout here. One that kind of runs back toward the outside of the vehicle that need to be removed. For those, you need a T15 Torx. With those out of the way, you should be able to pull back this wheel liner, at least all the way up to that highest fastener, which should give you access to unplug all your wire harness connections in here. So you can see these 2 closest to this opening. There is another one a little further in here that you want to make sure you get as well. They're all very similar in how they disconnect. They should just have a red locking tab that needs to be pulled back, and then a small thumb tab or finger tab, if you will, that you can press down on as you pull the connector apart. As you get back in here, you do have to kind of trace these wire harnesses back and pay close attention to them so that you're separating them everywhere that they connect to the fascia versus where they connect to the truck, so that when this fascia comes off, you're not pulling on any of them. So for example, the main mounting clip for this connector down here We're going to pop that off. This one, you can trace the main harness back, stays up with the truck. So pay close attention to those. And then again, you can see I still got to get in there and grab that final or third connector on this passenger side. Now it does look like there's a couple different ways you could detach from this molded plastic structure in here. The easiest seems to be with your T15, just pulling the two fasteners you see right here. You'll then kind of repeat that same process over on the other side. I will point out all our electrical connections were over here on the passenger side, but just knowing how things sometimes change from one model year to the next, it's a good idea to look for them over on the driver's side as well. Once you've done that, we can pull the flares free from the fascia, because you'll need to kind of separate the two to pull the fascia off the truck. For that, you just want to get your fingers in behind both the front and back of this flare, and then gently kind of pull out, separating the two. There's like 6 or 8 clips in behind here, kind of holding the two together. So that's what you're hearing pop as you do this. And then right about there, you can feel the top clips, basically right here where my finger are. Once you have those separated, this fascia should be able to slide out from behind this flare. Now we aren't quite ready to pull the fascia entirely off of the truck just yet. So just kind of leave that how it is here. We do have a few more screws that we got to get off underneath, as well as up top under the hood. So down here underneath, you have 4 more of those Torx head fasteners just in front of this active air dam. The order in which you get these removed isn't super critical, so you could do these kind of earlier on when you're under here taking some of this other stuff off as well. Up top, you will need to pop the hood, and then you have 4 more of those Torx head screws to remove right here. With those out of the way, you do need to kind of lift this plastic, flexing it just a bit to get it off of 2 alignment pins here. At this point, as you're getting closer to having this fascia removed, it's a good idea to grab a friend to just kind of help you catch it as it comes off the truck to prevent any damage there. At this location you see here, we've already got the flare popped, but you do need to still pop this fascia out of its retainer back in here. So with my backhand, I'm kind of getting behind the red part of the fascia itself and pulling out. That should be enough to start popping it along the seam, and then we can grab it and pull it out further along the front. You'll kind of continue that process all the way across the bottom of the headlight and even over into this area by just grabbing and gently pulling outward to free up all of these clips. At this point, the main fasteners holding this on are going to be 2 large clips kind of down in this area. I've already pulled out on the driver's side one. Basically, again, I'm grabbing the top of the grill here, or even getting my hand in behind this kind of painted black section there. And then you got to find somewhere firm to grab along the bottom and pull basically straight out, which seems a little bit violent, but kind of frees up that entire assembly. With this off of the vehicle, now looking at the back side of it, we have the same wire harness here that you would have disconnected in that wheel opening earlier on. You want to make sure to come down here and disconnect any clips holding the harness to the lower section of the fascia. And then you'll need a 7mm socket to remove the 3 screws holding those 2 together here as well. Now, I went ahead and removed a couple extra screws so that we could get this completely out of the way, just so you guys could see a little better what's going on in here. That should not be necessary for you. From here, to remove this lower section, of course, once you've done that on the other side, you have to just simply come into this whole series of clips that run all the way along the edge where the 2 meet, and just press the centers in while kind of pulling to separate the 2. And you basically just work your way all the way across pressing those in and sliding them out of the slots you can see here that each tab snaps into. Now during this step, you guys will still have this plastic section along with the lights attached to the fascia on the top side up here, but I do want to point out that the bottom of this has a clip that holds these two together in this location, so make sure you get that disconnected as well, and you'll see us cut this in just a moment. One thing I do want to point out quick, when I mentioned earlier during the removal that there would be 2 clips toward the center of the grill, there is actually 3 because there's one in here as well, so pay close attention to that. Moving back to getting this lower section removed, again, you're just popping all the clips throughout here, and then you'll just need to kind of lift up and wiggle that free, and this can now be tossed to the side. While the fascia is still off the truck, this crash bar needs to be removed. Before this can come all the way off, you have to get kind of up behind here and remove a couple more of those small coarse thread screws with your 7mm socket. Now you're not really going to be able to see this here on video because it's up in this kind of tight cavity here. They're running from the back to front if you just follow this flange straight up and threading into the backside of this crossbar. So you can see what we're working with here to access those, and then once we get this all out of the way, we can kind of point out where those are as well. So again, that's 2 screws, 1 per side. Once you have those out of the way, you can grab a 15mm socket and remove the 3 bolts in here per side to remove this crash bar. I already pulled the hardware out on the other side, and then behind here there's just a small tab that locks in to kind of support it, so we should just be able to lift up and pull this off of the truck. Now as we spin this around, you can see the clip nuts in the back side of this crash bar, as well as the mounting holes, if you will, for those 2 small screws that we removed just a minute ago. Now at this point is when you're pretty much ready to reinstall your fascia. I will point out, those of you that are planning to install a winch and not relocate the control box on top, or hoping not to, this is a good time to grab just the main center section of your bumper, get your winch loosely bolted down into it, and check some fitment. You can kind of hang that front center section up on the truck with the information you're going to see in the next couple minutes of this video, and kind of check all those clearances. The main thing that you may have to modify is this lower air dam section on this kind of active shutter system here. Technically, this whole section could kind of be removed by taking out a couple clips and just cutting it over on each end, but ideally, to keep everything functioning as factory as possible, you'll kind of trim this to fit your control box for your specific winch as needed. Now with that being said, we're not actually installing a winch in this specific vehicle at this time, so we're going to grab our fascia and get it lined back up on the truck. Really, for the moment, we're just going to kind of clip everything back in around the sides, and I'll kind of wait to put any fasteners back in until the very end, just in case there's any reason that it needs to come back off. When it comes to the 3 center clips throughout this area here that we kind of showed you with it off of the truck, just like they came off kind of hard, you're going to have to kind of shove them back in, so be prepared for that. And make sure you have that all the way back in so that it doesn't interfere with the bumper along this bottom edge. When you get to this point, we're going to be removing the fog lights and making a cut to the plastic up here. So we're just going to show you one side, and you'll kind of repeat the process over on the other side. You'll need to start out by removing the 3 screws that hold it in to the kind of factory clip nuts in here. So you'll need a 7mm socket for that, and you will have to reach up behind this mounting tab to access those. Once you get all 3 of those removed, the light can just kind of push straight back. It is still going to be connected to the factory wiring at this point, so you just have a connector right here on the back of the light that needs to be unplugged by pressing in the tab with a thumb or a finger and pulling those 2 apart, and then the light can be set off to the side. With the light removed, you are now going to be essentially cutting this entire lower mounting section off of your factory front fascia, basically connecting this point here to this point over here. So It doesn't have to be super critical. You're basically going to follow this kind of molding line, if you will, all the way across. I'm just taking a straight edge to use as a guide while we mark this out, kind of lining it up the best I can on those 2 points, and then you'll get a look at kind of where you should be cutting here. So I marked this out with a silver Sharpie. Just use whatever shows up best on your paint color, and you can kind of see now the body line here, or molding line, that we're going to be following. And I can now grab our cutoff wheel and get started on this. Now for our actual cut, I'm going to be using our 4.5 inch cutoff wheel. You can use whatever you have available to you. If you have a smaller air cutoff, an air saw, even a Sawzall can get this done, but you're going to need to be a little bit more careful with it, as you don't want to damage anything that's back behind here. On that note, also take a look back behind here and make sure that you've got your light wiring all tucked up and out of the way before cutting anything in this location. And then, as always, wear some safety protection, at the very least safety glasses, and ideally some gloves, so you don't get any hot plastic flying around, coming in contact with you there. As you can see in the center, there is one tab that's kind of horizontal and runs back, so for that you may have to kind of angle upward just a little bit, but this should be pretty much just a straight cut, and we can get this out of the way. Once that's had just a minute to cool, you'll need to come back in and just kind of clean up the edge. So a lot of this you can just peel off by hand. If you're having troubles with any of it, you can also clean up and even kind of straighten out any rough cuts with a sanding disc on like an air grinder or something there. And then a sharp razor blade works pretty well to just kind of scrape some of these bigger shavings off and kind of clean up the edge. Once you're happy with your cut and this edge here, you can clean up any of this remaining marker line and repeat that process on the other side. Now here you can kind of see a quick look at all of the main components of your bumper. We've got the main center section, bolt-on outer wings, our lights, a couple mounting brackets, as well as our gray accent plates. We're going to kind of walk you through how this all goes together, since we're going to be assembling the full bumper before putting it on the truck. We'll start out with our center section here along with this trim plate. So with some of that other stuff out of the way and a little more room to work, we can take this center light bar trim plate and get it installed on the front of our bumper here. Obviously there's 6 mounting holes in here, 6 mounting holes on the bumper. The hardware you'll be using in this location is black 1/4 button heads from your bolt pack. So I'm just going to drop a couple through here to help locate this and kind of hang it in place for now. And then we'll reach in on the back side and install the 1/4 serrated flange nuts. Once you have all 6 of those nuts and bolts started loosely by hand, you'll need a 5/32 hex of some sort, as well as possibly a 7/16 wrench to hold the nut on the back side of things while you tighten it up. Now on the back side of things, you can see the light mounting tabs hopefully in here. These are slotted tabs, so you should be able to install the hardware, hopefully provided by the light manufacturer of your choosing, into your light and slide that into place. Now, all of these lights vary just a little bit depending on who you purchase them from. So these tabs are roughly 22 inches apart inside of here. Go ahead and check out your light manufacturer specs before ordering and before attempting to install it in your bumper. With that being said, ours fits inside of here, but it's actually just a little bit narrow, and we didn't have a great spacer to just fit and fill the whole size perfectly on each side. So something that's simple and easy in here that most of us can do at home is just stack a few different washers in here until you get the desired width to bolt this into place. Once you have your spacers, if needed, and hardware sorted out, you can just slide the light into the back side of those tabs. You'll then kind of come to the front side and just visually align it to the best of your abilities for now and tighten it into place. From there, again, if you're installing a winch in your bumper, you can now bolt in that winch along with your fair lead. The winch will use the 4 slotted mounting holes you see here in the bottom, and then obviously the fair lead has its own larger hole as well as 2 outside bolt holes in the front face. From here, you can assemble both of your outer wings. Again, this is pretty simple. You just have the outer trim plates that need to be bolted on using the 4 bolt holes out here. Again, with black 1/4-20 button head hardware, just like we did that center light bar plate. Just like before, you just want to make sure to start all of that hardware by hand, and then again, grab your 5/30 seconds to tighten these up. From here, we can spin this around and get the lights installed. I will point out right now, we're working with the left or the driver's side wing here. So we want to find the light labeled L from the factory. The easy way to identify these obviously is the L and the R on them, but also they're only going to install into this wing properly one way, where the adjuster will line up with the adjustment hole in our wing. Once you drop this down in and get it lined up, you'll need 3 of the 1024 button head bolts and flange nuts to secure this in place. Just like before, you guys can probably guess, I'm going to tell you to start all of these by hand before you tighten anything up. Now these nest in pretty tightly, so there shouldn't be too much adjustment there. You just want to make sure to now grab an 1/8 inch hex and tighten this in place. You'll then repeat this process on the opposite side wing before getting these bolted on to the bumper. Now I do have all 3 of the inside bolts in and started already, which we'll show you in just a second. Once you have all of it started, you want to tighten up the outside 3/8 hardware with a 7/32 hex. Once everything's tight here, we can go repeat that process to install the other side wing. Once you have both of those outside wings bolted on, you basically have your assembled bumper. From here, you need to decide whether or not you're bolting on this top hoop. And if you are, go ahead and get it installed now while you have access to the back side of the bumper. Just like out here on the front, you'll need a 7/32 hex to tighten those up. You will likely have to switch to a standard or conventional Allen wrench like I have here to get to these inside bolts if you weren't using one of those already. Now, just before you throw that bumper on the truck, you want to find these 2 tie-in brackets. These are going to kind of have an open end and a closed end. This closed end with a mounting hole is the bottom, so get those in the correct orientation, and then you're going to install these reusing the factory hardware right in the same location as where you removed your factory tow hooks earlier on. So we'll just slide that in there, slide the bolt through, and reinstall the nuts here on the inside, and then go repeat that over on the other side. From there, this is a really good time to come in here and reconnect all of those factory wire harness connections. You will now see an extra one in here. That is for our center light bar using the harness provided by that light manufacturer. While you're in here, since you don't have some of the same factory locations that this ties into, where it attached to that lower part of the fascia that we removed, you can clip these off if you would like to. You can also remove the small kind of Christmas tree style clips or tabs from the bottom of these pretty easily by just prying up on one end and sliding them out of their slots. It's not really necessary, it just kind of cleans up the look of some of this. You can then get it all reconnected and find a safe place to tie it up in here with just some zip ties or cable ties. Before we get this all the way up here against the frame of the truck, I do just want to briefly point out the mounting hardware you'll be using in here, since some of this becomes a little bit harder to see with it tight to the vehicle. So in the 3 kind of radius rectangle holes on this back face, you're going to be using the 10 mil hex head bolts that you kind of see here with washers. Those are a little bit of an oversized washer, just to be aware of that and kind of expect that. And then down here in the 2 kind of lower slotted holes, you'll have more of the 1/2 inch button head hardware, nuts and bolts like you used here to bolt the wing to the bumper. Now the winch plate makes a nice flat surface on the bottom of here, so you have a good place to support it as you're getting it lined up on the truck. We're using a transmission jack here. If you're doing this more on the ground, you can use a floor jack and hopefully the help of a friend to help you kind of balance it and line things up. With a couple of your M10 hex bolts in hand, you can then start raising it into position, just paying attention to make sure you're not pinching this air dam up or pinching any of your wiring or wire connections as you're going into place. Now, as you're getting the bumper up here close to its final position, you can take at least one of those hex bolts and reach in through the opening here on the side. You'll probably have to manipulate the bumper slightly, and you can start threading these in by hand. As always, kind of common theme throughout the entire build, we are going to want to start all of this hardware by hand before we tighten anything fully in place. Once you have all three of those hex bolts in, you want to go do the same thing on the other side. You don't need to be too worried about the kind of visual appearance of the fit of the bumper just yet, as long as it's not impacting anything hard or doesn't have any major interference anywhere, because we still have to get that 1/2" button head hardware in. So I'll raise this up real quick. And then with that 1/2" hardware in hand, you'll need to kind of feed the nut up into the bottom of this tie-in bracket. Basically, we're looking to get it sitting vertically on the back side of the bracket face in here. Alternatively, you could drop it over the top as long as you have a finger in there to catch it. And then you'll feed that button head through from front to rear, tying that into the bumper. Now, if you're running into any alignment issues here, you can grab your 5/16 hex and use this bolt to kind of draw these two together, or alternatively, you could temporarily remove these to help kind of line up the hardware here and get it started, and then push the bumper back in and reinstall those original tow hook bolts. So once you have that front to rear bolt in, you can install the lower bolt from the bottom up. From here, you do want to take a step back and just make sure that the bumper looks visibly centered from side to side on the truck, which we've kind of already done, so that we now know we can tighten these brackets to the bumper. So again, it is your 5/16 hex here for both of these bolts. From here, we now kind of want to step back once again and check the vertical adjustment of the bumper. You can see, even though we tightened these brackets to the bumper, we can still kind of lift that up and let it fall back down. So we'll lower this back down and kind of do that at this time. During this step, you are looking all the way across the front of the truck to basically make sure that the bumper looks nice and level and parallel to all the body lines along the front. Any small gaps you have should be even from side to side, specifically out on the bolt-on wings. And from there, once you're happy with everything, you can reach in through the side and start tightening up those hex head bolts with a 17mm wrench. Once you're happy with both the side-to-side adjustment and the height, you have all your front mounting hardware tight up here. You can then come back with an 18mm socket and wrench and tighten those factory tow hook bolts, securing the brackets to the frame here. And then of course, do that same thing on the other side. Once you have all of that bumper mounting hardware tight, you just have a few things left to tidy up to complete this install. So those of you reinstalling or reusing a factory skid plate, you are going to reinstall this with factory hardware, simply omitting the hardware in these two hole locations here, since we no longer have the mounting bracket in place that tied that in to the crash bar on the front up here. From there, it is just factory hardware throughout all the remaining holes. With your skid plate on, you now need to fully reinstall the fascia if you haven't done so already. So of course, you want to make sure that it is snapped back into all its retainers along the top and the front edge, and then make sure that you get the flares fully snapped back in out here along the side. Once you've done that, you want to reinstall what will now be 3 of those small Torx head fasteners into the wheel liner out here. Now, to take a step back, one thing I think I forgot to mention earlier on was reconnecting the wires for your fog lights. Don't worry, at this time you still have access to reach in through here, find that wiring that should be hanging down, and reach in and plug that into the back of your fog light. So do that now if you haven't done so already. And then the final thing you're left to kind of contend with or figure out here is the bottom of this wheel liner, where you now lost 3 fasteners or retainers that used to hold that secure and in place. So a couple different ways you can tackle this. You are left with one small tab on the bottom of your fascia up behind here that you could kind of fold under and get it to line up with this hole if you wanted to either install a push pin like Christmas tree style clip, or even a zip tie, or source yourself a small bolt with a nylock nut to secure that right there. You also have this factory bracket left in here that gives you a couple secure mounting holes that you could essentially just line up and pop 2 holes through here with a drill, and then kind of same thing. You can either source bolts for that or simply cable tie it, as long as you don't mind the look of that. That does still leave you with just a little bit hanging down over here. This kind of felt type fabric that these are made out of trims really easily with a good pair of scissors, so you really can just draw out a line across here or freehand it if you're comfortable with that, and just trim off that last little remaining section kind of from here down toward the bottom of the frame in this opening, and just kind of clean up the look of that. So here's kind of what ours looks like after somewhat of a quick cleanup job. We may come back in here and touch this up a little bit once we get our skid plate installed and see how everything looks and fits together there. Again, that is entirely up to you on how picky you want to be with it. From here, you're really left with just wiring up your center light bar to the switch of your choosing. Obviously, some of you could go with an individual rocker switch. You may tie that into a larger switch controller if you're running a lot of aftermarket accessories, so that part is kind of left up to you. Also, to kind of clean up the look in here, if you're not running a winch, go ahead and grab one of our winch block-off plates when ordering this bumper to just tidy that area up, or if you installed a winch and haven't gotten your fair lead and hook and everything in, now is a great time to do that as well. Don't forget now to go back up and just install those 4 bolts across the top of your fascia under the hood again if you haven't done so already, and that will pretty much complete your install. So if you guys have any questions at all at this point about this bumper installation or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always email us at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.